Okay. I cannot accelerate at all. Okay! I see how it is. First impression. This is Smite Racer. What do you mean wrong way? I'm going the right way. Excuse me? Today we're talking about Apollo's Racer Rumble, the new temporary adventure game mode coming to Smite. Now this game mode had its initial issues on the BTS. Originally not everyone could actually even drive their cars, people had to drive backwards or couldn't drive at all. All of these kind of weird glitches that had to be fixed first for the game mode to actually run. But since today the game mode is up and running and should be working fine for most players, though there are still some glitches, for example if you disconnect early in the lobby. With that, let's have a quick look at the game mode, talk about how it works and the pros and cons of it. Apollo Racer Rumble essentially is Mario Kart with Smite characters. That shouldn't be news to anyone. It's a very straightforward game mode where you have, well, kind of a racing kart. You're playing a god and you drive through that racing track, which has certain speed boosters, it has walls that will slow you down, it has items that you can pick up, and it has grounds that will slow you down a little bit as well. At the same time, it's missing some of the typical dynamics from your average Mario Kart game. For example, it doesn't have the same amount of drifting speed boost, while it does have that to a little slight extent. And it does not have other more gimmicky features like the speed boost at the start if you start right at the exact time when the 3-second countdown goes down. The race itself takes place on two kind of redesigned maps that are inspired by the beach area in Conquest and the, well, solo side, the fire side. And they look pretty cool in my opinion. They are pretty well styled through. And before we talk any further about this, let us just jump into the pros and cons. First of all, obviously, this is a game mode that is actually refreshing and different from what we had before. Most non-traditional game modes we had before were rather based on the normal Smite modes itself, and even the Capture the Flag mode still had many of its mechanics. This one is pretty much completely new. The movement is different, the abilities that you have are non-existent, and instead you have those items that you pick up. So there's a lot of mechanic changes that went into this mode, which I think is a really cool thing to do. The maps are very well designed, as pointed out before. They have a lot of nice gimmicks, a lot of nice features, and they also have stuff like Poseidon's Kraken, which I think is pretty damn cool. The item use in the game mode is very smooth. The items are activated by left click and they work out pretty well. So at least no complaints there, no delay or anything, which you could expect with those kind of issues. The soundtrack is also pretty nice, surprisingly nice actually. Just the normal racing game feeling that you get from Mario Kart or anything like that. Very well interpreted into the Smite style. The guard selection of different guards is really cool. You have 10 guards to choose from, which I think is quite a lot, and they also have different interactions, different movements. For example, Red Tusker steers differently from other characters, and they have their individual horns. For example, Ra having his own laugh on his horn. So there are some pretty cool fun features on the side, so to speak, that made it into this game mode, which I think is really cool, and that overall make the game mode fun. But it wouldn't be a Duke Sloth video without some cons, and there are quite a few of those to this game mode that I would like to point out. First of all, the impact of the items in the game mode differs severely. Certain ones just have a huge impact, like the speed boost, whereas other ones, like most of the ones that are intended to slow enemies down, have relatively low impact in comparison. This feels a little frustrating, obviously, because you're already dependent on luck in those kind of games with the items you're getting, but if some item is just so much better than others, it becomes a little more frustrating. The second one is probably my biggest issue with the game mode, and that's the one that I felt made me almost not want to play it, and that is the collision detection. This is actually insanely bad. What happens when you crash into another player is they don't get bumped to the side or anything like you would expect it, but rather they get kind of a weird reset where they get a little bit ahead of you, whereas you get stopped in your tracks and basically almost get reset to 0 speed and just have to drive forward again. And this is no matter what you do. If you have any speed boost before or anything like that, you would expect to push an enemy away when you hit them with your car or like bounce off them, anything like Mario Kart really, but nothing of that sort happens. And I feel like this issue is at least a bit down to how the game was tested. You have to keep in mind that the game was tested on their internal server in the first place, and the internal server basically shouldn't have any lag. They will have that test server for things that will just be on 0 ping pretty much. And that environment doesn't reflect how the same kind of interaction would work when you actually have ping and lag factoring in, and that seems to be the problem with this collision from my viewpoint. Obviously, on top of that, there was probably no time to code any complex collision mechanics as they would be in Mario Kart, because it's just a temporary fun mode, but that really takes away from the game mode a lot. There are some other issues, those are, in my opinion, less significant though. What kind of stems from the same issue is the drifting being kind of bad in a way. It's often not worth using it. I've actually tried racing the whole track without drifting once, and I wasn't actually much less successful. I still scored 3rd place, because the drifting is often punished if you collide with another player, and it's harder to juke another player while you're drifting, obviously. So there's kind of a reason not to use it even, and that kind of really sucks, because in normal Mario Kart, drifting is pretty much essential. The guard shots itself is really fun, and I wish it would have some more impact aside of the horn. This is maybe more of a point of something that I wish would have been in this mode. I understand that it was not possible due to time restrictions on this, but it's kind of weird that Kabrakan and Skratatoskar basically seem to have the same driving mechanics in regards to how fast they accelerate and what their max speed is, which is very different in other racing games. There seems to be a lack of counters for the player in the first place. We basically don't have a blue shell, so there are very few options to counter someone once you got to first place. And if you manage to get first place in a bit of distance early on, it's very hard to actually lose that later on, because there's not much that can allow an enemy to close up to you, whereas other games obviously have some sort of mechanic for that. Something I'm really missing in this mode. The controls, in my opinion, feel a little awkward. The WASD is kind of not what we're used to from Smite, because we usually control the movement with our mouse. I understand that it's kind of necessary in order to have the drifting mechanic, but I feel like it would be cooler to just steer with your mouse and just accelerate with W, as it is the case in normal Conquest or normal Smite modes. The last one is that items sometimes just don't work. There's an example here where you hit an enemy with an item and it just doesn't interact, it doesn't slow, and that's just frustrating and annoying, and I don't know why that happens. I guess that's just part of the flaws that a relatively simple temporary game mode has. Overall, I think it's a fun casual game mode. It's good for an hour of fun, or maybe for playing with friends, but doesn't really capture the spirit of Mario Kart in my opinion. It's too rough around the edges. It doesn't really have that same playing with friends factor as it would have if you hang around with your friends in your room and actually play Mario Kart, which is how the game is basically intended to be played for most players. So I would recommend, if you want to play it with some friends in voice chat and don't take it too seriously. For playing it extensively, I don't know. Not my taste at least, but I still enjoy the effort put into it, even though as a Conquest main I'd obviously prefer more of effort put into Conquest. Who would have thought? With that, thank you guys for watching. I hope this was informative, interesting, insightful, whatever. Hope to see you all for the next one tomorrow. If you're not subscribed yet, I would very much appreciate if you click the subscribe button and maybe the bell. It really helps me out. Thank you for watching. Duke Sloth, out.